Ag PhD full episodes and more are now available on Acres TV, the newest ag platform connecting you to fields of information. Look for us on watchacrestv.com.
During our Farm Basics time today, we're going to talk a little bit about how farmers keep grain in their bins and prevent it from spoiling.
You know, on the front side of harvest here in the upper Midwest, grain is going to be coming into bins with a little bit of moisture in it, and it's going to be warm. Those are two factors that can really lead to spoilage. So for farmers to safely put that grain in the bin, if they want to keep it for any amount of time, they've got to deal with both of those conditions.
Yeah, so grain bins years and years ago used to not have aeration in there. So in other words, there's no way to pump air into that bin, and a lot of people figured out real fast, yeah, that's not going to work real well, because like Darren said, if the grain's going in at all moist and if it's warm, you got a real problem. How do you prevent spoilage in there? There's just no way around that. So now what most bins have is what we call an aeration floor. So there's a floor where there are little holes in there. So let me step back for a second. If a farmer's going to put up a grain bin, what he'll typically do is he'll pour cement and then put the grain bin on top of the cement, and then there's a floor, or we call it a false floor, where there's a gap between that floor and the cement. And so underneath there, it's wide open, and then there are little holes in that false floor or subfloor, whatever you want to call it, that aeration floor. So now air can be pumped into the bin and go up through that grain.
And of course, if that air is going into the bin, you've got to have ventilation out the top where you've got vents for that air to get back out. So as much air as farmers are going to push through, they've got to have adequate exits for the air as well. And as that air is moving out, it's taking out warm air through the grain, and it's cooling that grain down potentially, depending on when they're running the fans.
Right.
It's also going to be taking out some moisture, and that can actually create some problems as you push moisture from the bottom part of the bin out through the top. If you've got a peak to your grain, that moisture is all going to go right up into that peak, and you can have some spoilage right at the very top of the bin if you're not careful.
Now, I loved how Darren said we're going to cool this grain off and make it less moist. But the thing is, it all depends on the air that's outside. And so now, to make this whole process sophisticated, what we have is sensors in the grain all the way from top to bottom, and we have controls on our fans. So when the temperature is what we want and the humidity is what we want, the fans will automatically start up and pump the right air through the grain. So again, we've really taken this technology just in the last 20 years from, it's not very good, to, wow, this is fantastic, and I can get just about every bushel in that bin exactly where I want for moisture, and I can store it for a really long time.
So you may be wondering why farmers would store it for a long time. Well, of course, if they've got livestock to feed, they're going to need that grain to feed all through the season. And then the other thing is the market price. If farmers see, you know what, the market price is great, if I could just hold this grain for a few months, well, they've got a chance to make a little bit more money on the same amount of grain for their farm.
Yep. Well, we talked a little about how we can keep grain from not spoiling. Another big thing we're trying to do as farmers is keep weeds out of that grain. That also kind of helps a little bit. So we're going to talk about weed control later in the show with our Weed of the Week.